The day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than a risk it took to blossom. You see, for you and me and for the Israelites and for the people trying to figure out who this Jesus was, new life, as we all know, is hard. Hard to accept, hard to go through. For new life is a risky proposition. Quite often, literally and metaphorically, people enter new life both kicking and screaming. And yet at some point, the risk to reach out toward new life becomes less than the risk of what happens when you don't take that. It seems that the Israelites are having trouble living this new life as freed people. They're hungry. They grumble and groan. I don't hear ever grumble or groan. No complaining ever happens from any of us in this sanctuary. In our own personal lives, we never grumble and say that's not fair. We never grumble. I'm tongue-in-cheek here, right? We never grumble and say, but wouldn't it be easier to go back? Like the Israelites, where at least they knew there was food. Of course their new life is hard. Anytime any of us does something different, the change is challenging and frustrating. And at various moments when we're moving and living into new life and opening up as the blossom, we get scared and we want to close back down into the new bud. And yet, I think, as is lived out by the Israelites in their story of their journey, wilderness, even as new life was hard, deep down within them, the Israelites knew. This community of faith knows a few things about the challenges of new life. Even as we get ready for more new things, with the conversations and actions, we've begun to do things differently. Living in a partnership with St. Paul. The conversations and actions this fall of trying to be God's people here for the sake of our neighbors around us. So, like the Israelites, we're dreaming, we're grumbling, we're visioning, asking ourselves and our God a future of collaboration, a future of complementing, a future of connecting with those out there. We're trying to see new life and imagining what it can be. Scary work. But we're not alone in this scary new work. The church, all over it, in the Lutheran part of the Christ Church and all over the church. We're in the midst of these labor pains of what it means to be church in 2018 and beyond. Old ways of being church aren't as effective as they once were. Why people come to church is changing. We want different things from church. And yet, if you really dig down behind all of our hopes and dreams and fears about the future of life together, the thing that so many of us desire so deeply when I talk to people individually about the church, what we really want is for faith to matter. That thing that Jesus talks about in that lesson with the people about faith, believing in God. We want that to matter. We want our children and our grandchildren and the kids in our community and our neighborhoods to have faith be caught and passed down so the next generations can have meaningful and life-changing relationships with their God in Christ like we all have experienced at moments in our own lives. And most of us, when we stretch this conversation a little bit further, know that things need to look different for this faith to pass on, so that things might be new and different. This is what these scenes from Jesus talking about bread for these 6 weeks that we have in worship is all about. Jesus starts doing some healing, and some people hear about it, so they go to follow him. And all of a sudden, he's done all this healing, and he's gone to rest. And last week, we heard he went to rest with his disciples, and the crowds followed him. And they needed something to eat, so he fed them. And then he fed them, and then he escaped and went across the water with the disciples. And so the people have seen healings, they've been fed, and they go back to that place. Where's Jesus? The healings, the feedings. We're feeling really good. We want to follow him. So they crave a closer encounter with Jesus, partially because they know of the healings, partially because they know of being fed. They've been satiated. So they keep coming to look for him. And Jesus keeps moving on. He goes back across that water to Capernaum, and the crowds keep following him. Not in the same ways that some of them did early because they were intrigued by what he was saying or what he was doing, but the crowds are coming because their bellies are full. So Jesus says, you're not really looking for that thing you were looking for before. You're wanting more food. You want some more bread, some more fish. So after Jesus called them out on their changing desires, just like we mumble and grumble, we have changing hearts' desires, yes? Yeah. After Jesus calls them out, Jesus goes on and talks about that belief, that faith, that life with our God in Christ, calling us to believe in the one who sent Jesus. And then Jesus uses that metaphor of the bread of life, where we'll hunger and thirst no more in life with our God in Christ. Uses those words and says, I will nourish you. And I will change your way of relating to God and the world. Sometimes one healing at a time. Sometimes one full belly or 5,000 full bellies at a time. Sometimes our God in Christ changes us by one new experience. One bud opening up in our lives at a time. It works in our individual lives. It works in our communal life together. We have hungers and desires. And I believe that God is calling Crossroads into something new, and indeed that if we dig down deep, we are hungering as a community of faith for something new. We're on the verge of this new life, renewed energy and vitality, not just for ourselves, but for our community that surrounds us. And the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. We're on the verge of this day in our life together. You are on the verge of this day in your life as individuals. We're on the verge of this day where our risk to blossom is coming and occurring, and remaining tight in that bud feels less and less like life as we're called to live it. Now, the great good news of this new abounding life, of opening ourselves up in new and fresh ways in the world, the great good news of this is that our God, the one who led the Israelites through the wilderness and provided for their needs on the journey, the great good news is that our God in Christ, the one who healed and fed and called people to new life, the great good news is that our God in Christ didn't just do that once or a few times in the past in some history book or some faith book. Our God does these things now for you and for me and for us together. For God in Christ opens us up so that we may blossom, and the world around us may blossom in and through this community of faith, in and through your lives of faith. Look at a flower. Watch a blossom open, and know that that's the life that God invites you into and us into in our life together. Amen.